This episode of the Accounting Insiders podcast is brought to you in part by Xero. Xero is a powerful cloud accounting software that improves efficiencies across your practice. With all client data stored on a single unified ledger, you and your clients can easily access and collaborate on the same set of books. Xero's advisor tools and automation solutions reduce time-consuming manual tasks and put data entry on autopilot. Work faster and more efficiently than ever before with Xero. Visit xero.com/accounting insiders to learn more. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Insightful Accountants Accounting Insiders podcast. My name is Gary DeHart. I'm the publisher of Insightful Accountant and the host of Accounting Insiders. My guest is Heather Sperduto. Tell me again, Heather, your title with ADP.
Sure, I am the Vice President of Sales Operations, running point on the design and execution of ADP's accountant channel program across the country. So it's kept me busy since the day I graduated college, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's fantastic. And that, how long is the Accountant Connect comes under that. How long has that been around?
So Accountant Connect is our award-winning technology experience where we allow accountants to tap into the clients that we share and then some additional tools and resources. And we've had it out there now for several years. We have 81,000 accountants that have registered for the experience. So it's put us in a pretty good place with the level of interaction that we have with the CPAs, accountants, bookkeepers, enrolled agents, the individuals that fuel the accounting and the bookkeeping for small business owners, mid-sized business owners, and even for those larger companies.
That's great. And I know it's super rich in its offering, and we are going to touch on that in a little bit. So let's kind of set the table here for what we're doing. So we worked together at the end of 2022, pulled together a survey basically looking for service trends in accounting, kind of looking at payroll, advisory, and just other things, really just trying to get a pulse on what the accounting community is doing in terms of payroll and in terms of their practice. Are they going to advisory, or are they pulling away from advisory? And so we wanted to hop on here and share some of those results and make sure I'm changing slides here. Nope. Is that changing for you at all?
Not yet, but I
go. How about now?
There you go. Perfect.
Woo! All right. Technology 101. So what we did in the research, the objectives of the research was basically to survey the accounting profession to better understand their behavior and future thoughts regarding their businesses and payroll specifically, really kind of honing in on payroll. Took about 10 minutes for people to complete it. And then we basically took that data, sliced it into a gazillion different ways. And the people were people who are either subscribers to Insightful Accountant or Tax Practice News, or people who have been in and out of our website. And then also included some of the ADP advisory board members, which I think most of them probably are in and out of our site or subscribe to our newsletter. The respondent kind of demographics of the respondents were 28% were CPAs, 27% were just call themselves accountants, 10% were enrolled agents, and 33% are bookkeepers. So a good blend, I think, and probably a fairly representative blend of the accounting space as a whole. We did have 153 completed surveys. I was looking before we hopped on this call. I think we had there were about 80 surveys that weren't completed all the way through. So that data is not included in this. So we had about 230 or so people who went through most of the survey, but we pulled out the 153 that went, question one to question whatever, and went all the way through the survey itself. So I think here we want to kind of, Heather, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of the key findings of the survey. And actually, before I do that, I do want to reference that while this is available in a podcast format, so you may be just listening to this, we do have a slide deck that we're referencing, and you can go to the Insightful Accountant YouTube page and see this full presentation with the slide deck, again, on our YouTube page, which you can access from insightfulaccountant.com. Okay, so Heather, how about just sharing some of the key findings?
Sure. We're going to look at some of the actual metrics in in detail and go through them, but overall, payroll is just one of those areas that people can't escape, right? And it's either they're going to do it or they're going to recommend. And what we found in the survey was not just payroll, but 1099s and advisory services seem to be where accountants really truly have a role in interacting with their clients from those arenas. Now, tax credit and talent in the survey showed up on the lower side. It was split down the middle, though, where half accountants are saying, I intend to increase the number of payrolls that I'm recommending. The world of work has gotten more complex. Compliance seems to be ever changing in that landscape. But then the other half of those surveys said they want to increase the number of payrolls that they process. So it was almost like a 50-50 split right down the middle. Sure. There were also some areas that were intriguing when we looked at some of the HR functionality, and in particular was the employee handbook. Seemed to be of interest where firms are saying, hey, I need to make sure that my clients have this not only buttoned up initially, but ongoing, that it's in a good place so that the employees are acknowledging when changes occur. And with talent top of mind for everyone, as business owners are trying to get really good people in the organization and keep them, with that amount of hiring, they also need to make sure that those employees come on board in a really good fashion. So payroll advisory are the services that our accountants are looking to grow in the next couple of years, definitely topping the charts.
Yeah, which I'm certainly glad to see that. I mean, certainly the talking heads have been talking about advisory, got to go advisory, got to go advisory. And it's nice to see some hard data saying, you know what, I've been listening. I agree with you. I've got to go into advisory. Now I think what the profession has to do is to really define what advisory is. I think it can mean a lot of different things to different firm owners. I think it depends on what type of business or practice you have is going to determine how deep into advisory you get, is my take on it. I know we'll get a little more detail on this, but just looking at these summaries, when you see that, like the number 2 bullet point, half of accountants intend to increase the number of payrolls their firm refers out, but half of them tend to want to keep it in-house. Is that something, is that in line with what you see when you're out in the market space?
We do, and we've seen an increase, Gary, and there's a couple of conversations that we're having that continue to be a focus. You know, payroll for a long time, accountants, when they would bring in clients, say they got a new client into the practice, very often they would ask them how it is that they do their payroll. If the client was happy, potentially they would leave them on whatever service they were using. Maybe they were using a software package. But in today's environment, especially with that next gen of accountants that are coming into the profession, we're seeing that they're being more vocal in identifying their preferred tech stack. So even if a client is using a different provider, when they come in, they're asking additional series of questions and going instantly down that path of advisory to recommend the tech stack that they prefer to use within their practice. Because with the experience like Accountant Connect, they have access to the information that they need, whether it's on the general ledger interface side, grabbing the reporting or the intel to spark some of those conversations. We're seeing that they're having a higher propensity to align with a service provider if they're making their recommendations.
And to me, again, I think, well, you and I were on a webinar last week, and I think we talked about it, but it just seems, as a small business owner, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for my accountant to be able to basically just say, go through the list. Yes, no, yes, no, 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 yes, and give me advice and tell me what's right, what's wrong, and how to better my business. That's what we pay them to do. So let's dive into the slide. So not surprising, I mean, this was a payroll survey after all. So services the accountants offer currently: payroll, 1099s, advisory services, time and labor management, workers' comp, and then it kind of scrolls down from there. I mean, still high percentages at 70% in HR compliance. When you saw this slide, anything that stood out as a, wow, here's an opportunity for the accounting professional, or here's an opportunity for ADP, or anything that didn't line up with what you know, having, I think you told me the other day, 25 years, I think is what you've, how long you've been in this space, right? I mean, you launched accounting for ADP, so.
Yeah, 25 years seems like yesterday, but seems to be one thing that doesn't change. And I think that's the way we started the conversation. Payroll is that area that it's a given, and accountants touch it, feel it, experience, they use the data and the analytics. So it's nice to see the validation that they're involved in some fashion or other, whether accountants are doing the payroll or they're making the recommendation. There's the 1099 one is intriguing, especially for ADP as we look at the gig economy. Over the last several years with the pandemic and the way people are working, we're seeing that growth in gig workers. So no longer going to my job, working 9 to 5, getting that W-2 at the end of the year. People are working jobs and they're doing so all over, right? You no longer have to work from where that business resides. So we're seeing significant growth in the 1099 market and the advisory services, which we had talked about. I'd be curious, Gary, we did this survey several months ago and the retirement one, was almost at that 70% mark, but with all of the changes that we're seeing in retirement, especially with Secure 2.0 Act, I wonder now, here we are several months later, if that number would be on the rise even more so.
Seems like it should be, right? And actually the now I don't know, is Secure 2.0, is that the so right now there's what, 13 states, 12 or 13 states that have mandated retirement. Is that under that Secure 2.0?
Yeah, so the Secure 2.0 is 100 plus pages, right? But it's one of those areas of compliance that feels like it has a positive energy to it because it's encouraging employees to save for retirement. So there's a lot of different credits in the Secure Act that are appealing. If there's automatic enrollment or the administration fees, all that could come back to the employer in the form of a credit if they start putting those plans in place for the employees to save.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's roll on to the next slide. So we did ask, how are you offering these services? Are you handling them within the firm? Are you referring providers only? Or do you do both referral and internal? And so currently, I again, not being the payroll expert that you are, this somewhat surprised me that payroll, again, like you said, pretty much everybody has to be involved in payroll at some level, right? If you are working with a client. So 35% handle payroll within their firm, 15% refer, and then 47, so almost 50% do both. What does that slide say to you?
It varies by client, right? Sometimes it varies by the uniqueness of the client and where they are in that business. Are they a brand new business with just a handful of employees? The employee count tends to be an indicator of, will the firm do the payroll or will they make the recommendation? So there's different points of complexity. Multi-state is a big one that we're starting to see now. As employers are hiring workers all over the country, that makes it extremely complicated to keep up with the different state regulations. So there's usually within the firm, like a little bit of a metrics of decision making when they hit a point that firm feels they would be better suited to outsource. Like some go all in and say, I'm going to align with the provider and I'm going to make those recommendations. But other times it becomes that little bit of a mix where on occasion they'll take the payroll in-house, but then there are other circumstances where they'll recommend it out.
Right. And so we're back on the 1099 question I meant to ask you a second ago when you were talking about 1099s. Does ADP have a 1099 offering?
We do. We were actually just at our accountant advisory board, and we had a couple different groups that came in and presented to them and gaining their feedback and their insight. We have a group called Work Market, and Work Market is in that 1099 space, everything from trying to help with the onboarding of 1099s all the way through, the payments and continuousness. We also are looking at how do you make that scalable? Does it come down market? So there's a lot of decisions that are exciting that we're making to keep up with the pace of how it is that employees want to show up for work.
Right. Okay. So when you look at this this breakdown, is there anything that when you saw this slide that made you go, well, that's a bit of a surprise?
No, that middle ground of referring only, again, we're seeing that in the tax credit service where some firms jumped in with whether you look at R&D or you look at the employee retention credit that came after the pandemic as a way to help businesses get that credit if they were able to keep their employees and what those gross receipts had looked like. So we saw some firms like jump in and say, hey, I'm going to do it in-house, but then you had other third parties that were popping up in the market with services to look at, okay, is the business even eligible? And then what needs to get done to make sure you have the administration through going after and seeking those credits.
I got you. One of them that stood out for me was the employee handbook prep, that 8% currently handle that internally. I'm surprised that 8% actually handle that internally. That and I know as we go through that number, as far as who plan to do it, is rising. But just as we talk to a lot of people when we go to a trade show or communicate with a lot of people in various ways. I don't know that I've ever had anybody say, "Oh yeah, we do that as part of our advisory services or onboarding." Makes total sense. Again, as we were talking about before, it's about in my opinion, the accounting firm taking full ownership of that client and being that one-stop source for the client. And I think most clients are willing to pay for that.
We have employment law attorneys that do a fabulous presentation on occasion at some of the accounting trade shows or state society events. Mm-hmm. And they spend a lot of time on the handbook, having the conversation about some companies. All companies want to go out there and they want to do it right from the get-go, right? I don't think anybody intends on not having a handbook in like a buttoned-up approach. Yeah. But we mentioned earlier, where sometimes businesses fall out of compliance is the employee's continuous acknowledgement as things change, right? So at ADP, within our HR suite of services, we provide the ability to go in there and create that handbook. And the nice thing is that the acknowledgements come through whenever there is a change. So for the firms that do payroll, we offer a wholesale model, right? So there are firms that utilize ADP's technology behind the scenes. To the client, they feel the interaction and the experience with the firm, but we do the heavy lifting, the depositing of the taxes, the filing of the taxes, and there's a wholesale HR handbook component where we do have firms that act as that middle person to guide their clients to create the handbook. And then from there, automatically those updates occur within our run payroll engine, which is nice.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that again just seems like just huge opportunities for the profession to get into that business as part of overall advisory. It's a phenomenal tool, right? So let's talk about. So we asked, do accountants, or we didn't ask this question, but so what we're seeing here is, do they intend on processing or referring payroll? Which way are they headed? Heather, what are you seeing?
It's that split, right? It's a split where some are saying, I'm going to recommend, I'm going to identify who that partner is, I'm going to make a recommendation. And then, that you have the other group that said, no, I'm going to actually go ahead and I'm going to process the payrolls on a regular basis. And for firms that process payroll, it creates that year-round revenue. It helps with retention on the client side. And then there's that level of interaction ongoing. But the ones that process payroll, they need to make sure that tech stack terminology again, that they have the technology and the service infrastructure to be able to do so. Mm-hmm. Couple that with a strong pricing model so that they're looking at the ROI if they are going to do the payroll on a regular basis for their clients.
On that pricing model, is that something that ADP gets into with I mean, with they're not members, but with the firms who are using ADP, or is that something that's in Account Connect to help them kind of lay out pricing?
What we do is the firms that work with us typically have a dedicated associate that aligns with their firm on the ADP side. And together, they'll have a conversation and get guidance that if they are going to use our wholesale model, the price point is significantly discounted for the accounting firm.
Right.
The accounting firm, in turn, can choose to bill their clients as they see fit. And in all honesty, Gary, we see a variation. You know, some bill traditionally with every single payroll the way that we do, and some other service providers in the market do. Some bill monthly. Some make it as part of their value-based billing, but we definitely see it vary across the board in terms of how they offer that service and where their price point is. That's a whole nother survey we should do at some point in time, looking at value-based pricing. Is it the billable hour? You hear that that's going away. But we see it vary across the board with the firms that we work with.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about, so now we're looking at services accountants would like to offer versus what they don't want to offer. And this is where we find that employee and talent management, again, leans back to some of the tools that you guys have to offer. But if you're not able to see the slide, basically what we found was 16% said they're interested in offering employee or talent management, 13% employee handbook prep, 12% work opportunity tax credits, and then 11% in HR compliance, and also 11% in retirement advisory. And so what was on the negative side, Heather, if you wouldn't mind sharing that?
That R&D one still does not seem to be overly appealing for firms to get into on their own. So they still seem to be leaning on some partners, third parties out there. The hiring solutions was another one at 39%. And then you see the tax credits from the work opportunity filings, another one that they're leaning on some other providers out there.
The work opportunity was number 3 on both sides of the want to offer and don't want to offer. And I don't know the details of that or how involved it is, but I imagine it's, if you don't have like a dedicated individual or somebody who's really on top of that, it would be difficult to bring that to a firm if you didn't have that focus.
We did a webinar recently. We do them periodically. We tend to bring them back into our educational curriculum. But we have a team of tax credit individuals, CPAs themselves, a gentleman by the name of Michael Smith, who's just best in class. His reviews and his comments were off the charts, and we did it last week. But firms are craving insight and knowledge because it's viable. And the R&D isn't necessarily new. It's been around for a while, but there's ongoing and continued enhancement that make it more appealing when you look at the different industries and the services that they offer, where companies would be eligible to take advantage of that type of research and development credit.
And that was last week. Now, is that something that you'll be redoing, or?
We do it periodically because we get a lot of asks from the accountant community, but any of the educational CPE events that we do, it's adp.com/CPE. So we always have our upcoming webinars that are out there, but accountants are welcome to go back in as long as they register. They could view the recording, not necessarily for CPE when they go back and view the recording, but if they're looking for that intel, we make that available and leave that up there for an extended period of time.
Gotcha. Okay, great. And that was just adp.com/CPE. CPE. There we go. Yeah. I know it kind of sounds like it's an ADP promo piece that we're doing here, but I mean, we're talking about survey results from ADP, so it's not a promo. We're just sharing some great information here. So speaking of great information, so we also found out about services accountants would most like to see grow in the next 2 years. And you want to touch on that, Heather?
Well, the advisory services obviously is the highest one at 70%. The payroll, which we validated at the 43% number. We do see the retirement 401k simple IRA as 35% when we looked at the data from this perspective, where we look at growth in the next 2 years. There is some opportunity though, Gary, when you look at the data and the analytics in the payroll and how that could actually fuel advisory services. So what's going on in the scope of a business, the trends and the analytics of they're hiring people, they're terminating people, they're opening up in additional states, for example, or maybe there's trigger factors that would prompt an area of compliance or recommendation for one of these services. So I'm very intrigued about how we're seeing in the market that the firms are getting proactive. And as opposed to that forward, or as opposed to that backward looking view, taking that forward approach based on some of those trends and coming in as the hero, making recommendations and guiding the clients into areas of growth.
Gotcha. So as we look at advisory opportunities around HR for accountants, again, and I have to keep pointing back to myself just as a small business. And, it's me and us, it's me, it's my business partners in Tucson, everybody else is contract. And so we had a couple of employees, and when we did, there's certainly some things that popped up that I didn't know anything about, right? And needed a good advisor to help me out. Our accountant at the time wasn't super proactive, so we had to do a lot of digging ourselves. But for me, if I'm paying somebody X dollars a month, that's a service that I need and really would expect. So let's look at just some of those opportunities, and this also will tie in to Accountant Connect and how Accountant Connect or how advisors can use Accountant Connect and those solutions that you offer. Again, Accountant Connect is, you have access to it if you have one company on payroll, isn't that right?
Ideally, yeah, we would love for the accountants to invite the mutual client that we share into their dashboard.
Yep.
Some people come into the experience and don't initially link the client, but as soon as they start to utilize the technology, then we start to see that rapid fire of them going through their client base, identifying which of their clients are on ADP, and with the proper authorization, the client then slides over to their dashboard. So when we think about this advisory services and leveraging the different elements of the data and the analytics, it could help firms stand out so that they're able to attract new clients potentially with services that maybe their peers in the industry or the local community are not offering. But then you also have that retention piece. So how can I help my clients stabilize their costs or maybe reduce some of their risk with some of the services that I could go above and beyond in that traditional tax and accounting that maybe they were offering in the past. But the end goal is to help deepen relationships across the board. And we do feel that some of the data available in the payroll could help spark these conversations out there with the clients.
Right. And then so what would and if you're listening, you don't see the slide deck. So what we're getting into now is how do you really recommend HR advisory to your clients? So what are some of those topics or some of the information that I could pull from all this payroll information that ADP has? How do I leverage that? And maybe we can go just a little step further. You kind of went high level on the last slide. Maybe we can just dig a little bit deeper on this point here.
Yeah, my passions, Gary, align in the training and development arena, both internally and externally. So as I look at where I spend my time and energy throughout the day, I'm constantly designing curriculum or coaching individuals on their ability to go out there and get new clients, right? And part of that art of gaining additional business or onboarding new clients is the ability to ask really good, insightful questions. And it's not a matter of an accounting professional asking a series of 50 questions to that business owner,
right?
But like what's current and what's happening in their business. So are we seeing that the client is evaluating some providers on the HR side? What are those compliance challenges that they're starting to encounter? We hadn't brought it up in conversation yet, but when you look at stabilizing cost in the arena of medical benefits or just benefits in general, or workers' compensation. We did touch on the Secure 2.0 Act, but do they have awareness that it's even happening? And then do they need assistance to be guided to seek out a really good plan in the retirement arena and then administer it within their organization? Remote work, hiring people and navigating the complexity of, I have a business in New Jersey, but I just hired someone in Illinois. Illinois has a mandate for sexual harassment training. So now I need to make sure that I put that on the docket so that that workplace navigation of the employees when they're not local. And then just the overall well-being of the employees. So if you were to look at any of the research that we do from our research institute, we spend a fair amount of time looking at, okay, what's happening in the economy? So we pull some data around the economy, but then we also look at the real sentiment of how workers are feeling. And we put that together, and there's definitely an increase and a rise where people are looking for companies that take care of their entire well-being, as opposed to just going to work to get that paycheck. Right. And then the last three that we put out there in terms of conversation starters are the businesses growing or looking for some type of merger and acquisition? And when they are going to expand, there's obviously a higher level of guidance that would be needed. And then on the employee side, if they're not keeping them and they're seeing turnover, maybe where are some of those struggles, or what are the root issues contributing to some of those loss and the turnover that they're having in their staff?
So how about, I don't think this is on the next slide, so I'm going to throw a question out there, and again, based on your time in the market. So let's say I'm an accountant, I'm talking to a client, and my client shows either some interest or shows, touches on some of these questions that you just threw out there, some of these topics. What does that look like for me as the accountant, my next steps? Like, what do you see best-in-class firms doing as these opportunities pop up? How do they address them? Because again, I think the challenge is you've got, the large majority of the market is small businesses, right? And our biggest challenge as a small business owners, whether we're an accounting firm or a media firm, is time. And so here's these great, have these great conversations, topics come up, but how do I take advantage of them? How do I take that next step with my client? That's the question I'm trying to get to.
I would back up.
Yep.
And I would suggest the level of preparation before we even go in and ask those questions. So let me give you a couple of real world examples, because I think it will help frame it up for the audience and for the listeners. Say I look in Accountant Connect and I see specific to my client, we show these proactive client insights. So I will say, okay, I have this client, Bright Minds Innovation. I noticed that they hired 3 people in the last 30 days. So that's a trigger on the growth side. So for those 3 individuals, I would want to know what that onboarding looked like. Was their paperwork in order? Did they acknowledge the employee handbook? Are they all in, for example, the state of New Jersey? Or that example of, could they be in Illinois? Could they be in Pennsylvania? Could they be in New York? So we take the data on the hiring side, but then we also share, are there additional jurisdictions that you need to be aware of? Now, it could be on the flip side, and maybe this Bright Minds Innovation lost 4 people. Well, that's important to know as well. In today's environment, could it be that with wage growth, their wages are not at a line? So here would be an excellent example of advisory services. I know the data walking into the conversation. I validate with the client and ask them those thought-provoking questions about their growth or where they've struggled in turnover. We then have an area, by the way, this is all complimentary. So it's not like these are things that accountants are paying for. The Accountant Connect experience is completely complimentary. We have compensation benchmarking. So now I could go into a map of the country based on 30 million records. We serve up what that compensation looked like in a specific geographic area for a specific role type in an industry. We do it on the compensation side, but then we also offer some industry insights on the benefit side. So I could see if my client has a lot of turnover, maybe they're a construction company, they're not offering benefits today. I could see the breakdown that says, okay, what does benefit offering look like within construction companies in this market? Oh, the demographics are showing that typically it's a lot of single males and the age breakdown in their 20s and 30s. So when those companies in that specific industry are offering benefits, they're only offering it the majority of time, more than 50% of the time, at the employee level, not to a spouse, not to a family, right? So that might be more intriguing as I consult with my client about the opportunity that maybe they should be offering benefits as a way to get good people and keep them.
Right. And that I need to get access to that. I've never been inside of Accountant Connect just because it to me super intriguing just because of all the amount of data. Do you do anything in reasonable compensation?
You know, you and I were having that conversation last week.
Yeah.
From our accountant advisory board, they were asking us and making the request that we bring more of that reasonable comp into Accountant Connect. Okay. We do have flares of that up market within different product offerings at ADP, but they wanted to see it specifically for the advisory arm of what we offer within the data and the analytics to look more closely at reasonable compensation.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think I mentioned last week, we just went through one and it's going to save us, a considerable amount of money when we get it in place and when it comes tax time. So I think you really kind of already touched on what's on this slide, and that's kind of that conversation, right? And really, I think one thing that is really worth stressing is how you started that off, and that was kind of doing your homework, right? Take the time before you go into that meeting and think about, either, whether diving into Accountant Connect or whether it's spending time on the client's P&L and looking for things that are going really well or things that are going poorly, but taking the time prior to your meeting and doing your homework and thinking about, okay, if I am truly an advisor for my clients, what would that look like? What am I advising on? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think it's reasonable for somebody, again, an accounting firm, go, well, I'm getting into advisory. We're going to do it all, right? We're going to go soup to nuts and just start doing everything today. Would it be a wise approach to take small bites and maybe you start off with the handbook? Maybe you start off with that, probably the handbook, actually. That's what we saw as people are probably leaning towards. But it seems like it would be a lot to bite off in HR advisory because that could go so many different ways.
I think there's an assessment of firms may already be doing this today. Like when we engage in conversations with firms and ask them to talk to us a little bit about their advisory services, some firms are doing it today but don't realize it's advisory, right? And then the other thing is the awareness to the client. So does the client even know that there is an expansion of some of these advisory services available that they would want to take advantage of? And whenever we look at the marketplace, we look at it through the lens of the accounting professional, but then we also look at it through what is it that the clients want. So while this research that we just did, Gary, was on the accounting firm side, we also went and validated the mind of the business owner and what they were craving. And interestingly enough, there was a data point that 68% of the time, business owners were saying, we think that our accounting professional is so well poised to offer additional services. And the one that they were raising their hand the most at was in the arena of some of those HR advisory services.
Right. Well, and again, small businesses don't have the dollars or the talent on staff to be able to hire an HR director. And I don't need an HR director for three people, but I definitely need advice because if I'm three people or 100 people, there's still some gotchas out there that could cause me a lot of pain.
Yes,
As,
and HR is really people. It's
right.
it's all the facets that have to do with the people in a company, and the people are the most important asset. So obviously the business owner wants to make sure that they're taking care of them in the best fashion possible with how their brand looks when people come looking for them to onboard into that business, all the way through how they stay that brand ambassador after they leave, if they move on to someplace else or they retire, how do they still always be that advocate for that business?
Absolutely. Let's roll into these next couple ones and then we'll wrap it up because I think we're right on top of our time here. So we've touched on, again, this is not an ADP promotional piece, but it is around advisory. ADP is certainly in a very good spot and works with, as you've heard, it's tens of thousands of accounting professionals, but millions of businesses, big and small, right? So you've got tremendous amount of data. And for an accounting firm to get into advisory, they have to have the tools at their disposal to be a good advisor. They certainly already know how to advise on accounting and on bookkeeping and if they're tax related on tax, but HR advisory, which is again what we've been talking about, is a whole other world that I would say most accounting firms, that's not in their core set of strengths. But with the tools that ADP has and brings to market, it makes it a real possibility, right, to bring these types of services to a practice and for a practice to leverage them for growth. And so can you just touch on, again, if you're not able to see the screen here, we've got a slide that kind of shows how ADP is positioned to help you as an advisor work with your clients on an advisor capacity, ranging from recruitment to retirement. But Heather, could you just touch on that, kind of what all these different things are? And again, we've kind of talked about all of them already, I think. But if you wouldn't mind just touching on each of these bullet points quickly, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, if I could give you a visual, if I were going to draw a pie chart, right? 20 years ago, you mentioned I was here 25 years, right? If I were to look back at the conversation that we were having with people, 80% of the time it was payroll. And modern day, when you look at this span or this suite of services, now only 20% of the time is the conversation around payroll. Like that's a given. Modern day, it has to do with that screening and selection of people. Yes, obviously the payroll's a given and the tax component, but the HR, the benefit, we mentioned the compensation, activating that talent, looking at the data and the analytics, making sure that that time and labor is in compliance from a management perspective now through the retirement aspect, right? So, that's how we engage in conversations as we go out there in the market with business owners. And we're taking that same conversation to accounting professionals because we want to help them fuel some of the advisory in these different arenas. And very often through Accountant Connect, hopefully we provided everyone with some examples that are intriguing, that they would want to go out there and take a look at those data points to help be more proactive in the conversations, because obviously if these areas are top of mind for business owners, let's figure out where the accountants can align and jump in with their area of expertise, but supported by really good technology, a service experience, and those data points to help have those really solid conversations.
Perfect. And again, and I think that's what it takes. You've got to have those data points. You have to have the information. You have to think about, kind of wrapping up, think about what you want from your client and what you want for your client. And then how do you bring all that together? Do you have, and this will be my last question really this time, do you have within Accountant Connect, is there kind of a, 10 steps to advisory, do this first, then do this second? Is there a path to success?
Two things. One is we do have a certification program. So
Okay.
Rhonda Scherder, who is our head developer on Accountant Connect, does very similar to what you and I are doing right now in a little bit of a podcast setting with Darren Root from Rootworks, Now Right
Yep.
Networks. And they have a series of sessions that walk through the Accountant Connect experience, but then seed opportunities for advisory services. The second thing, though, is our overall CPE curriculum. We have many members and thought leaders, whether it's our advisory board members or thought leaders out there in the profession that tackle some of those topics that have to do with advisory services and get more granular. Get more granular with, okay, how do I determine the service I want to offer? How do I price it? How do I package it? What does the conversation look like when I take it to my client?
Right. Well, I think that's a great way to end our time. We went a little long, but that is quite all right because we've got great information here. So, how do people find you? How do people find ADP? Where are you going to be in the next, coming months? We're kind of moving into trade show season, and then we will close it up.
Yeah. So our team is on a plane every week, doing the rounds for all of the shows, that you mentioned. 'Tis the season.
Yep.
The best place to look for us probably is adp.com/accountant. That'll help navigate to the different areas, whether you want to get into Accountant Connect or CPE curriculum. As for myself personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a note. I'd be more than happy to get back out there with you guys at any point in time if you have specific questions on anything that we covered throughout today's session. But it's an enjoyable ride. We think the world of accountants, they've earned that trusted advisor role tenfold, especially in the last couple of years. And we have the highest level of admiration and respect because we know that the clients out there, the accountant says jump, they say how high. And when they do that, those recommendations put their clients in a place where that, they could thrive. And we have just the utmost respect for accountants and what they do for business owners.
Well, I certainly like what ADP, what you guys are doing. I've gotten a little bit of insight on Accountant Connect over the past, couple of years. And actually, it's funny. Who is it you said is doing that training?
Rhonda Scherder.
She was actually my first podcast interview.
There you go. Look at that.
And we actually were talking about Accountant Connect. And even then, again, I think that was probably a year and a half ago. She was sharing some things that I didn't realize were part of Accountant Connect. And I think it's probably doubled since then what you guys offer. So again, this is not intended to be a promotion for ADP. We really wanted to come together and talk about what we found when we did this joint survey across a couple of hundred people, a couple of hundred accounting professionals. And what we found is payroll, they're going to be involved in it but it's either going to be internal or external, pretty much split right down the middle. Advisory pushing more that direction, but that advisory is taking a really holistic approach and look at the customer's business to encompass more of these HR tools and HR services, again, which I think is a wonderful thing because small businesses don't have the ability to consume this information. We don't have the ability to have someone on staff to look at it and to stay current with rules and regs. So certainly appreciate what ADP is doing to support the small business community, to support our accounting community, and look forward to bumping into you at a show very soon, Heather. We'll see you.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon. Thank you.